Hey folks, Loman02 here. Currently going to do some more 93-94 old school content. Sorry, pretty early on my end, so and I've got to run relatively soon. But I wanted to get these matches in between myself and Jordan of Cardboard Confrontation. Well, they were fresh in my mind. So I'm going to be drinking coffee during this, and I'm in my night clothes. All right, that said, so we've got two games we're going to be covering here. This first one, I'm going to be playing a Stasis deck. That first hand was totally unkeepable. You really don't want more than one Stasis in your opener, and you want interaction and mana. This hand has mana. It has some interaction. It's very light on combo pieces. Kismet is a card that, honestly, like, I don't mind in control as like a late-game lock piece. I'm only running 2 in this deck because I don't really want to draw it that often. But this is virtually a 5-card hand because Kismet just really doesn't do much for me in most matchups. If I have time to develop playing its control, I tend to think it's okay, but, you know, meh. I don't know. It's rough. It's very good once you have a state. If you get it down and then can put a Stasis down, it's pretty good. But it's like, you know, a 2-step haymaker punch. Like, everyone just sees it coming, and it's like, you know, oh, they dropped Kismet? Okay, well, now I need to leave up my counter magic or my interaction. Because one of the things you'll find with this deck, and you know, how do I put this? You don't, like, if you have to counter a counter spell to resolve Stasis, you're already doing it wrong. Because you're essentially putting yourself back by 2 turns. So, like, your opponent's still winning in that circumstance. And if you couple the fact on top of that you need to also have 2 additional mana that are just a sunk cost in Stasis to cast Boomerang to bounce your Stasis on their end step, you know, you're already looking at after you have to counter their counter spell, you know, additional 2 mana, which is essentially 6 dumped mana to pull off the Stasis combo, which limits you by essentially 2 additional to 4 additional turns of draw steps. So, you know, Kismet's in a weird spot for me. Like, I feel like it's better just to, like, hit them when they don't know it's coming. I just haven't been impressed by the card that much the more I play with this deck. And it could be my build as well. So this hand can counter some spells. I don't know what I'm playing, so I'm like, probably good enough. I see an Air Elemental, and I'm wishing I had a Swords to Plowshares, or that they had not had Mana Vault, but that big old behemoth is going to beat down on me for the foreseeable future. So I've drawn Disenchant now. It's medium. It's, you know, it's going to blow up this Soul Ring at some point in time. They do cast on a Serendipity. If they have a Force Spike, I'm just going to, you know, have another 3 power attacker coming at me. But I do manage to get that one with a counter spell. The plan here is to leave up counter spell for another turn, resolve a Howling Mind, and Disenchant on my next turn. Or if they don't do anything that I need to counter this turn, just Disenchant on their end step, and then leave up counter spell plus Howling Mind on the following turn. So I do get another Serendipity, which is good. So at least, you know, I'm keeping the clock off me. I draw my other Kismet, which is just abysmal. I'm just like, God, Kismet, you're killing me right now. And it always does. Like, I'm never really happy with the card. I get Psionic Blast, and I'm down to 7, so if they don't draw into a burn spell, then I can probably do it. Maybe? Probably not. It depends on what I draw to. They draw the Psionic Blast, though, so we just, you know, we get burned out by the blue deck. Which is cool, and I do think that in general, you know, like the best prison decks are really like D deck, but I do think that Stasis has a doubly hard time against like blue aggro control decks. So anything that can get down a quick threat and then back it up with counter magic, kind of for the reasons I was talking about, like the theory of play for Stasis. Like if you have to counter on the turn you're casting Stasis to counter their counter spell, it's just so bad. It just feels so terrible. Like, yeah, you may get to kill one of their creatures with, like, a Tabernacle of Pendrell Veil, but you're already just behind so much because you've had to eat up 4 mana at that point, and you're still committing 2 more to get your Boomerang online and get Stasis back on their end step, and then, you know, just play the Stasis game. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll go into Game 2 here, post-sideboarding. Alright guys, back. So we did sideboard. I put in an additional Swords to Plowshares, and I believe I added... No, I already run 4 Disenchants in this deck. I'm trying to think what else I added. That may have been it, actually. I'm sorry. I put in a Red Elemental Blast as well. So I have a pretty fast hand this time around. Time Vault's kind of an odd card in this deck, so the theory of play with Time Vault is it can only be played fairly in this deck. But the idea is you know, you get a Kismet down or, you know, Anastasis, and if you have a Time Vault in play, you can just keep on giving your opponent the turn, and essentially they'll mill. Like, they won't be able to play cards because their artifacts and lands come into play tapped, and then, they'll just run out of cards. And that's kind of how it's used. So it's actually used to give your opponent turns in this deck is kind of the theory behind it. I guess if they're really behind, you can use it fairly. I think I probably used it fairly in this deck before. So this hand's really quick, and you're going to kind of see me use the deck a little differently that's intended. So you see my boomerangs now. Boomerangs typically intended to bounce stasis on opponents or on opposing end steps. But here you're going to see me start bouncing lands just to like tie up their to basically keep their funnel of mana very small. I didn't really do the math here. I think well, they're dead either. They're pretty dead either way. I probably could have. No, I couldn't have killed them this turn if I had Ancestraled them. So I guess it was right to Ancestral myself. I was just trying to think if it made sense to Ancestral them as opposed to me. I'm only getting a little bit of life off this Ivory Tower. Draw another Vice here. Play the Vice out. Play a land out. I bounce one of their lands as opposed to the Serendib Efreet. The Serendib Efreet's doing work for me right now. It's going to die to the Abyss anyways, and, again, like, I don't think it's very possible for them to, like, they have to Ancestral Recall me and then, like, Force Spike their own Ancestral Recall to, like, maybe get below lethal. Probably not. So anyways, we win this game just solely off the power of Black Vice, and the 2 boomerangs probably helped out because it put my opponent back 2 land drops, essentially, by their turn 5. Which tends to be pretty good. So, I rarely win with the deck this way. This may be the first time I've won with the deck this way, but it did work out that, we had a fast draw, followed up by Time Twister into a bunch more cards, Ancestral Recall, basically all the Power 9, like just the busted mana and the Power 9, and some Black Vices to kind of just tie the game up. And then using what is arguably a bad card, Boomerang, to good effect with Black Vice, just to slow my opponent down enough to have Black Vice kill them. Anyways, guys, quick pause, and we'll jump into Game 3 of this match set. Alright, guys, back. This hand is acceptable. It's not as good as our hand in Game 2, but, it has an early Red Elemental Blast if we desire it, and it has a Black Vice. I think, in retrospect, it's possible I wanted to play the City of Brass out turn 2, because it's very likely with them having Soul Ring that they could have also had Serendib Efreet. But I was kind of leery about playing around Strip Mine because I really wanted to have red mana to have Red Elemental Blast. So this is actually an interesting turn. I keep on picking up my coffee like I want to drink it, but I'm talking too much. So here, they Force Spike, and I know they're trying to get me to tap down, which could be one of two things. Like, one of the cards that I'm kind of leery of, because this deck does rely on its artifacts and enchantments to win the game, is Flux, Energy Flux. So my thinking is this, like, they play a Force Spike there to make me tap down, and there's a good chance that, by doing so, I'm going to have sunk up to 6 mana in tax requirements if they play an Energy Flux, or I'm going to be able to save 1 artifact and lose 2 others, which will likely be the Black Vice and the Mox Sapphire. Because Vice is losing utility, Sapphire just it does not net mana, it loses mana every turn it's a play. But I will want cards off Howling Mine because I'm kind of short on mana drops at this point. Alright, so that said, like, my thinking is this, like, if they have it, they're still going to have an additional land drop, which means that they can pretty easily counterspell my Red Elemental Blast if they do play out Energy Flux. So I opt to pay for the Force Spike, get my Howling Mine down, beyond Force Spike. But I also, with this line, commit myself to paying 2 to keep the Howling Mine around, because I at least want to get 1 card deeper in my deck, ideally to find mana, because I don't want to ever get behind on mana. But unfortunately, right now, it looks like I am getting behind on mana. So I do the Flux. Flux is bad news bears, but we're not dead in the water yet. They don't have a threat, so that's good. Like, if we were getting beat down by a Serendib Efreet as well, that would be bad. So find a Stasis. Don't really want that dude right now. I'm not going to cast my Ancestral Recall for the same reasons, because I don't want to get it countered there on my turn. It's so much worse to get it countered on my turn than it is their turn. They go ahead and Strip Mine. They force my hand here. Well, kind of. They do me a favor here and play the Serendib Efreet while I'm floating mana, so I know that my Ancestral is not going to get countered. I finally lose my Howling Mine. It stinks. But now I have Red Elemental Blast available, and I have 2 counterspells. So they have a threat down, but I have some answers to things and stuff. And if I really need to drop the hammer on the City in a Bottle, I can. I sideboarded in City in a Bottle, but I was kind of disappointed with it in this game. I only run 4 cards in this deck that die to City in a Bottle, so I thought it would be better against them than it would be against me. But in all likelihood, that probably was wrong. My thinking was like Flying Men, Serendip Efreet. They have 8 cards that die to my City in a Bottle. It's like what my brain's thinking. But that's redolent. That's based upon me not drawing my City of Brass, my 3 City of Brass, or my Library of Alexandria. They also probably have a 9th card. They probably have Library of Alexandria in their deck. So they do 4-spike this. 4-spiking it is honestly almost the same as countering it because it only gives me 1 turn to pay for it. But it also taps them out of mana. But come to find out, they actually have a very sizable mana situation, whereas we do not. Another error on my part, I probably should have cast the Ruby to play the Stasis, because it would have actually given me an additional turn, paying for it off of my non-colored sources. Actually, that's not true. I used a Plains. Never mind. That wasn't a mistake. It was just, it didn't matter. I do find an island, which is good, because it means I can pay for another turn and hopefully use the Tabernacle to kill their dude, their Serendib, because I really don't want to have to cast City in a Bottle when I have 2 Cities of Brass in play. It's just so bad. Alright, so their Serendib's not going to die to my Stasis, and I'm going to have to sack my Stasis. They're going to get the untap before me. They've got to draw some cards, so pretty rough. Luckily, I get a little lucky here. I draw Mox, although non-blue sources in this deck are not that great. They're really only good after a Time Twister turn or on the very first turn of the game just to cast initial stuff, like artifact stuff. I do TT here. They counterspell it, which is rough because I'm mana choked and I'm going to need the mana on the back end. And they just keep on fighting me, and it makes perfect sense to me because they want to time my mana up as much as possible so I can't wiggle my way out of this. Counterspells tend to be kind of bad if you're behind on mana, obviously, because I'm looking to have an impact on their ability to resolve spells or use their mana. But, as it turns out, what I was kind of doing with the Time Twister there is to Hail Mary into, like, one of 2 things, like Black Lotus, Counterspell, or Mana Drain. Black Lotus, Time Walk, or, Black Lotus, or not Black Lotus, Mox Sapphire, other Mox, Time Walk, so I get the untap. And I feel like if I get the untap there, I am in a better spot, but not an ideal spot. Actually, if I had with 2 counterspells in hand, I'd be probably okay for at least another turn cycle. But yeah. I think a little bit of a tougher matchup for the Stasis deck. I think Stasis just tends to... I think it tends to languish. I think, counterspell decks, I think it tends to be fine against because they don't really present a threat, so you have time to sculpt your hand. But when you have like a good aggro control deck, like, blue-red, like this mono blue deck's pretty solid too. And maybe even like Rug, like anything that runs counterspells and efficient creatures, and backs up those efficient creatures with counterspells, tends to be pretty good against it because you just don't have the time to dirtle around and wait for the draw steps to kind of mold your hand. It tries to abate that with like stuff like Ivory Tower, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. So anyways, I think it is a tougher matchup for the Stasis deck. It may need a little more tuning. And like I said, it's tough when you start counterspelling counterspells to resolve your Stasis, which is your operative piece, your operative card. It just doesn't work out for you. Like you're gonna run out of mana to continue paying for it, and then get into a boomerang to bounce it back. So, anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed this first game. I have a second one for you that we'll be jumping to momentarily, and then I gotta hurry up through that one because I gotta get moving pretty soon. But be back in a second. All right, guys, back, and now it is time for something completely different. And if you get that reference, then you've obviously were probably born in the 80s or 70s and watched the Monty Python. Anyway. So, we're playing something completely different. We're playing Pink Weenie. So this is a white-red deck. Splashes red. Not really, it's red more so just to play Bolts, Blood Moons in the sideboard, and 1 Wheel of Fortune. But this hand's great for what this deck's trying to do. It's got Savannah Lions on turn 1, so we can enact our primary plan, which is just to win through combat. And then if we draw a land, I'll probably play it on turn 2, resolve the land tax to have my white, quote-unquote, Ancestral Recall in play to accrue value, and also play a secondary Savannah Lions. So, hand's a keeper. One thing to note, this is a Crusade version. Not all of these decks are Crusade versions. I tend to like Crusade in more of a creature-heavy meta, because it tends to make your creatures scale up better against like Serendib Efreets and Erdem Djinns. But I do think the Crusade version is a liability against control decks. Because you'd rather just have like a Thunder Spirit to get over a moat than you would a Crusade in some matchups. This is a Preacher version as well. So really this deck is kind of, this version of White Weenie is designed to play better against other creature decks. But I do think if you want to tune it to beat control-style decks, you could cut the Preachers, obviously, and then probably cut some number of Crusades, put in Thunder Spirits and maybe like a copy or two of Seer Angel, and you'd be better off against control because you just have more flyers to get over moats. Or even put in some artifact dudes, like, maybe a Juggernaut. So this game, pretty straightforward. I know I haven't been talking that much about the game, but to kind of cover what happened here, and to give some analysis on it, opponent plays turn 1 Library of Alexandria. Generally speaking, it's a recipe for success in 93-94. Not in matchups like this. Generally, Curd Apes, Savannah Lions tend to beat Library of Alexandria turn 1s, or on turn 1, because you're basically back a land drop if you're using it to draw cards. And if you're using it for mana, then you're down a colored resource, which tends to be problematic in a lot of decks, especially like multicolored decks. But as this game develops, I see what my opponent's on. They're on probably some variation of an RG Ponza or RG Ramp deck. My inkling is towards Ponza because we've seen they've discarded 2 Ice Storms, just an abysmal card against land tax and against Weenies. You pay 3 mana to blow up one of my lands, and my spells cost 2 mana. I have a couple 3 mana spells and 2 Armageddons that cost 4. That's it. So does not tend to be very good. Ponza does not tend to be very good against White Weenie. Urnham Djinn, so note on Urnham Djinn. Urnham Djinn is an ubiquitous threat with a lot of there's Armageddon. It's a very common threat in 93-94. But I will say this about Urnham Djinn. He kind of almost, and this is kind of an anachronistic analogy. 'Cause it may not make sense for newer players. He reminds me in a lot of ways of Phyrexian Negator. Phyrexian Negator was really great at one point in time. And if you're not familiar with the card, Phyrexian Negator, 5/5 trample, CMC, 1 black, 2. If Phyrexian Negator would be dealt damage, sacrifice X permanents where X is the amount of damage. So, someone lightning bolts your 5/5 for 3 with trample. You have to sacrifice 3 permanents. So that card at one point in time was really great. And the reason it was really great is because you Dark Ritual it out on turn 1 against High Tide decks, or any blue control deck that really couldn't deal direct damage. Use Quicksands or counter spells to really Board Impact was Quicksand for them, or Capsize or something like that. So you get that guy down on turn 1, you're probably just going to win a game against them. 90% of the time. The counter to it for the blue decks was 1, pray that you win the die roll, and then sideboard into disrupts for game 3, because you're probably going to lose game 2 if you won the die roll in game 1. Sideboard into disrupts, and on the turn 1 ritual, you disrupt their ritual, draw a card off of it, and they don't get to get their negator down on the timetable they need, and then you counterspell their negator on turn 3. But anyways, that all aside, I kind of equate Urnham Djinn to negator. Urnham Djinn, I think, gets a lot of its power. One, it's huge. It's a 4/5. It's just big. It's a big dude. And it's pretty efficient. It costs 4 mana. 3 is better in this format because, you can generally cast it with, Rituals a lot easier, or with Black Lotus a lot easier. But that aside, Urnham Djinn tends to be very good against control, kind of like Phyrexian Negator was just great against control because he's a fast clock. He's 1 turn slower than Negator, but he's still quick. But where he does not shine is kind of against these Weenie decks. I don't actually like him against the Weenie decks because he's a horrible blocker. The options with this Djinn are at this point, to sit back and block, which one thing is always going to get through, especially the turn after it's been cast, because it has to give something Forest Walk. So unless you've cast it off a Moxen, something's going to get through. Ideally, you're putting it on the smallest thing, but, you put it on the smallest thing, and, you're still taking damage from it. And if you're getting swamped like you are here, you don't really have the option to attack, because I'll take the 4 damage and then attack for, a bazillion, and or, 12 damage, to win the game on the turn after. So, that's kind of one of my gripes about Urnham Djinn is in a creature-heavy meta, I actually like Urnham Djinn less because I think, unless you get your Urnham down first, you tend to be in a really rough spot. But against in a control-heavy meta, which old school was really about playing blue decks, right? The best decks tend to be blue. The best decks against the best decks tend to not be blue, actually, which is kind of funny. But on the whole, those decks that beat the living crap out of blue decks tend not to be that good against just a lot of random stuff, whereas the blue decks are good against a lot of random stuff. But Curd Ape decks tend to beat the crap out of red decks, or out of blue decks, but they tend to have a lot of other liabilities in assorted matchups throughout the format. Whereas like the blue decks tend to be really bad against that hyper aggro stuff. But after they get out of that the initial onslaught, if they do, they can win. But they tend to have a good range against just beating other just random stuff, like the stuff you wouldn't expect. Like you're just like, all right, my blue deck can still beat that. That all said, like Urnum's not in a good place in this matchup, I don't think. But if I've been playing like D deck, Ernie gets a lot more spooky. Anyways, guys, going to jump to the next game. We saw we just kind of overwhelmed my opponent here. Just kind of had the ideal draw for beating a turn 1 library. But the next game is actually quite a bit more interesting, and we'll get to it momentarily. All right, guys, back. I just noticed during the pause that I'm wearing my my Nirvana t-shirt. Sorry, it's the morning here, so I'm in my sleeping clothes still. Anyways, if you're a child of the 90s, hopefully you can appreciate that. All right, so this hand. This hand's not as good as the first game, but it's also not bad. It's got a lot of interaction, and it's got one threat. My opponent's had a red deck, so if I'm my opponent, like they probably sideboarded a lot more heavily than I did. They appeared to be an RG Ponza deck, so my guess is they took all the Ponza stuff and threw it in the sideboard and brought in all of the creatures and creature removal they could. So like I'm thinking like Earthquakes, and I'm thinking just dudes. Any dudes they have are better than no dudes. So in a lot of ways, I look at them like kind of sideboarding like you would in like a shop's mirror and vintage. Like just bring all the dudes in and take all of the stuff that's not a dude out of your deck. Basically, it's kind of like a general theory. There's other ways of doing it, but I mean, in general, that's kind of like what you see happen. Like, you drop all of your like, your sphere effects and bring in like, precursor golems or whatever. So if they have those, they're going to bring them in because they do not want to run their Ponza cards. They're just not good in this matchup. So basically, anything other than their Ponza cards is probably better than their Ponza cards, unless they have a really bizarre sideboard. But the one issue I'm going to run with this hand is it's very threat light, and because I know they're going to bring in any removal they have to include like a bunch of Earthquakes, plus dudes, my Order of Leper is probably not long for the world. But because they're doing that, it may also mean that they just have like less guys early to play. I do see Mishra's Factory on turn 1. I'm happy to draw Acacian Javelineers. It's not phenomenal right here, but it's going to scale well over time if I get some Crusades, and we should be able to use to good effect here. Now I have Lightning Bolt up, so attacking with the Factory seems kind of bad. They do have an Earthquake there. I don't think I have much of a choice. I mean, like, I'm not going to... If I drew another creature, I probably wouldn't have played it out there in fear of Earthquake. But I think if I just leave a 1/1 on the board, it's kind of bad. Draw another Order of Leper. So I think in that case, I just... you accept the 2 for 1. They, get their Mishra's Factory going. So, quick pause. This is a pretty obvious misplay by Jordan here. It happens. So... It's very early on my end, and it's very late on Jordan's end when we're playing this game, so I think he was getting ready to go to bed. Stuff happens. No judgment zone on it. And I don't think it matters that much. I would have had to burn off my Lightning Bolt a lot sooner because I planned on Lightning Bolting this Mishra's Factory. Because the play air, I get to Chain Lightning it with my 2 open red mana here. He could have sent it back, but he instead decides to resolve a Llanowar Elves. Llanowar Elves, has me worried for an odd reason. So I did, when I sideboarded my deck, I only sideboarded in 2 cards. I think aggro tends to want to sideboard a lot less than pretty much anything else it's playing against. So I brought in 1 Preacher, because I felt like Preacher would be very good against his deck. And I brought in my 4th Swords to Plowshares. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this with a Lightning Bolt on his end step if he does not play another creature, because I want to make sure that any Preacher that I top deck is live to getting like an Urnum Jin or some big dude, not like a little dude like Llanowar Elves. Oh, the cool thing about Preacher is like if they give you their crappy creatures and they're attacking with good ones, you can kind of use it like a very bad, kind of inefficient Vidalcan Shackles to just like start trading off creatures with them, like have them kill their Llanowar Elves with their Urnum Jin, and then untap your Preacher, cash it in again for an Urnum Jin, etc., etc. So you just keep on taking their worst creature and then trading it off, or chumping with it so you can untap your Preacher, which is another technique you can use Preacher for. So Preacher, I think, is a pretty critical card in this matchup. I'm not going to wait on a Preacher for this. I don't want to wait until their next turn and see my draw step, because if they do have an Avoid Fate, then that is a tragedy. Like... They have a Disrupting Scepter in deck. My guess is they probably didn't have enough good sideboard cards to bring in, so they left this card in. Disrupting Scepter is probably not very good against this deck, because, I'm playing Tax, which tax tends to just wreck Scepter. I'm obviously behind on land drops here because I don't want to play lands out at this point. I'm kind of like waiting to see if I can get an Armageddon or if I can get a land tax, just like start getting virtual advantage by thinning my deck of land cards and putting them in my hand. I'll go ahead and ditch one of my planes, and I'm going to Disrupting Scepter. I'm going to disenchant this Disrupting Scepter right now because I kind of do want to keep my lands. I get a little bit, I don't want to say gypped, but I get a little bit punished here because I do draw the Preacher. But with them on 2 cards, 3 cards, it's very likely they have Burn in hand because generally speaking, they're gonna play their card. They're gonna play their cards if they can cast them, and they're gonna hold their removal because they can't really damage me enough to make it relevant here. They do have Fissure, so the Preacher wouldn't have done anything anyways against the Dragon. I do draw into an Armageddon here. I don't have a way to deal with the Suchi right now, but if I draw any creature, I can double block or single block with a first strike creature, the Suchi. And if I draw removal, I can remove the Suchi. And if I draw land, well, that's the worst draw. But I Armageddon there with being behind on the board with threats, but being ahead with mana, or so I assume because I've been sacking lands. I do find the Disenchant, get rid of the Suchi, and just keep on beating down with Javelineers. I remove my opponent's land because I don't need more lands to cast spells here. Like 3 mana is enough for this deck to generally function. And you'll see Javelineers do some work here. I cast out an Order of Leper, a little Knight, Pump Knight, and get in for my 2. Opponent finds, I believe... No, they don't find it this turn. I thought they found a Mox this turn, but they find it probably next turn. I go ahead and leave the Mountain in my hand. I think I misplay this. I think, honestly, because of the presence of Chain Lightning in their deck, it probably made more sense to play the Mountain out there, despite the fact that I really don't want to, play more lands than I have to. That said, they do have a Chain Lightning, so I got to get punished for it. They have another Chain Lightning, and I'm like, all right, when am I going to learn my lesson? I should just play the other Mountain out so I can redirect this thing. Draw the other Geddon. Not really desired right now. They don't have really mana that I can disrupt. I mean, I can blow up a Strip Mine, 2 Strip Mines. Doesn't really matter. So I'm 1 damage away. Javelineers finally gets killed. It's brought my opponent all the way from 20-some-odd life down to 4. I draw another Javelineers, so I'm very happy about it. I'm glad Javelineers gets to be part of winning this game. They cast Earthquake to deal with the Javelineers for 2. I cast Lightning Bolt over the top on the stack and managed to get them. So 2 pretty cool games against Cardboard Confrontations. Jordan here. Definitely appreciated the games, man, and we'll have to get some more in the future. Hope you guys enjoyed it as well, and please let me know of any issues with the video or any decks you want to see played. The Cardboard Confrontation gentlemen, they play pretty much anything. I can build pretty much anything. I don't have everything built right now, but I definitely enjoy playing this format a lot and exploring it. And if you haven't seen their content, you've only watched mine, go check their content out on 9394. They have a wider range of decks than I've shown on my channel, to include some very interesting Timmy style decks, like living plane decks, just really cool stuff. Maybe not cutting edge competitive stuff, but some very cool and interesting deck concepts. Very creative. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll be back relatively soon with some more content for you. Take care and enjoy your Friday.